Good morning. Today is March 1st, 2023, and my name is Michael Conley. I'm the Assistant Superintendent of Finance and Operations. And today I'm going to provide a brief presentation on the status of the state budget and where things stand with the new governor's Massachusetts state budget, which recently came out this past week. We're specifically going to focus on the Chapter 70 program and how that and what it means for the North Reading School District. So the state budget was released this past Wednesday. It did include an increase in Chapter 70 aid for education by $586 million, or what is a 9.8% increase. It included a government local aid increase of 24.6 million, which is about 2% over fiscal year 23. There was an increase to some charter school reimbursement. The special education circuit breaker program also increased. Homeless transportation had an increase as well. And then the Student Opportunities Act, which does provide additional aid via the state Chapter 70 formula through the foundation budget for low-income, economically disadvantaged students, English language learning students, specifically special education costs, and employee health benefits. So Governor Healey's budget did fully support what would actually be known as year 3 of trying to fully fund the Student Opportunities Act for education and school districts. The minimum aid per pupil funding amount was set at $30 per pupil. And those two bullets there, the Student Opportunities Act and the minimum aid funding level, probably have the biggest impact on North Reading. And I'm going to explain that in a slide, kind of going later in this presentation. So this is step 1 of the state budget. It does move on to the House and then to the Senate and then the Conference Committee, and really doesn't get approved until mid to late June. So for more information on the state budget, you can click on that link. But now I'm going to focus a little bit on the Chapter 70 educational funding formula and what it is required in terms of determining what each district gets for their Chapter 70 state aid. Step 1 in the formula is you calculate the foundation budget. That really represents the minimum spending level needed to provide what is known as an adequate education. Each year that's adjusted based on changes in enrollment, changes in certain student demographics, grade level, low income status, ELL, proficiency. It's also adjusted due to inflation. Those are the main factors that go into calculating each district's foundation budget. That's the minimum level to provide an appropriate education. Step 2 is you calculate what is known as the local contribution requirement, and that essentially is what communities can afford. So this represents the amount of local appropriation needed to meet the required net school spending. Step 3 is you determine the amount of Chapter 70 aid. This represents the amount of state aid to finance the state's share of the foundation budget, and it's generally composed of different kinds of aid, foundation aid, minimum aid, etc. But essentially, the difference between a community's foundation budget and what they can afford, the local contribution, generally equals each district's Chapter 70 state aid. So that's just kind of a snapshot. In the case of kind of North Reading, most districts, including North Reading, spend more than the minimum by an average of 20%. North Reading in fiscal year 23 spent approximately 30% more than the requirement. So the foundation budget, or the required net school spending amount, is really a minimum level, and most districts, like North Reading, actually spend more than that. If you look at what the formula is trying to do, it's trying to respond to local economic conditions. The foundation budget, again, the minimum amount set to provide an adequate education, it's mainly looking at enrollment, inflation, and then what is known as the wage adjustment factor are all playing a role in calculating the foundation budget. So the wage adjustment factor gives districts credit for having higher school costs if it's located in a geographic area where average wages are higher than other areas of the state. And it's essentially calculated using the latest available average wage data that is supplied by the state's Department of Employment. The local contribution mainly takes in property values, income levels, and what is known as the municipal revenue growth factor, which is really set by the Department of Revenue and quantifies the most recent annual percentage change in each community's local revenues, such as the annual increase in the Proposition 2.5 levy limit that should be available for schools. The state average municipal revenue growth factor is about 4.5%. So those are the main variables or factors that go into the calculation of the foundation budget and then what communities can afford. And the formula is trying to be progressive in a sense that it's trying to respond to local economic conditions. The Student Opportunities Act was an attempt to better calculate the foundation budget for accurate cost increases in areas like special education and benefits, for example, which for many, many years was grossly underfunded or undercalculated in that foundation budget. And the Student Opportunities Act is trying to more appropriately adjust the calculation based on year-to-year increases in those two high cost driver areas, special ed and benefits. And then it's also trying to play a role in student demographic data for economically disadvantaged students, special education, and ELL students as well. So if you get into the numbers of the Chapter 70 program from North Reading, you can see that our foundation enrollment is going up by about 21 students. There's our foundation budget, what on the minimum level set of what we can provide. That's an increase of $2 million. Again, then you're calculating the required district contribution. The difference, should everything be functioning as the formula wants it to, would be Chapter 70 aid. But as you can see in the case of North Reading, just like it's been for many years, we're getting a little bit more aid than the difference between foundation and required. And our Chapter 70 aid is only going up by $68,000, and we for many years have defaulted to sort of the minimum aid level of that $30 per pupil. So if you take $30, which was the minimum aid that every district would receive at minimum, times our foundation enrollment 2,269, you would get $68,070, and that's, in the case of North Reading, been what we've been receiving for a number of years. And the reason for that is that our target aid share, which is 17.5%, so we're considered, in the eyes of the Chapter 70 formula, an affluent community. So the target aid share is much lower than what we're actually receiving as a percent of foundation. So North Reading's been about 27, 26, 25.5%. So in the eyes of the formula, we're getting more Chapter 70A than what the formula wants us to do. So when it comes to the increase, we default to the minimum increase set at a fixed amount per pupil, which by the governor was funded at $30 per pupil. So that's how you get the $68,000. And if we were more closer to our target, we might see larger increases in Chapter 70 than what we've been seeing. But the formula attempts to adjust for all these factors, and it says, even though the foundation budget's gone up because of the Student Opportunities Act and other factors, our required net school spending level has gone up, it sort of tries to say, wait, you're not going to qualify for this additional foundation aid, phase-in aid, because in the eyes of the formula, you're already getting a higher percentage than than what the formula wants North Reading to receive. So if you look at the chart, that's our 5-year trend. So Chapter 70 aid really plays a small percentage in what we're kind of foundation budget is and what we're required to do. So districts do receive different levels of Chapter 70 aid because the municipal's ability to pay differs. So again, in the case of North Reading, the required local contribution is equal to about 73%. So we're like that, like 73, 74 to 26% breakdown. And our target aid is actually a lot less at 17.5%. So North Reading is well above their target, where communities like Stoneham and Westwood on this chart, who are also minimum aid communities, are right about at their target. So there's a lot of different factors at play when you look at the Chapter 70 formula. It's not a one-size-fits-all. It's doing different things for different communities based on different demographic, income, wealth, property wealth that are at play, as well as it also takes into account where each community target aid is at, actual aid is at in relation to their target. So that plays a big factor, and I also think when trying to understand the formula, that could be the biggest factor that in some cases is overlooked by many when they're trying to understand the numbers and why a community right next door may have seen a big uptick increase in Chapter 70 and a very similar homogeneous community next door is receiving not a large increase. And if that is the case, you want to look at how close or what the delta is between their target aid and their actual aid. So Chapter 70 program, this is another chart, different way of looking at it. Kind of a helpful aid, the foundation budget. In the case of North Reading, our required net school spending is greater than our foundation budget. In a perfect world, that dotted line would be right at the blue kind of striped line, because we would be at our target and everything would be functioning as the formula wants it to. Because our actual aid is greater, then our required net school spending is a little bit greater than the foundation budget. And as I mentioned earlier, just like many, many other communities in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, our actual net school spending is a lot greater than what the foundation or the required net school spending level is. Because keep in mind, that is set as a minimum amount of spending level, not the requirement. So most districts, the vast majority, spend more than they're required to do. Another way of looking at the numbers, so again, this kind of shows that. So there's a handful of communities kind of right at or just below what they're required to do. Many communities, North Reading would fall in the 120 to 150. I think I mentioned we've been averaging about 28 to 30% more than our net school spending requirement. And there's 129 other districts just like North Reading spending about that percentage over what we're required to spend in terms of our actual compared to our net school spending. I mentioned this earlier in the Chapter 70 program in North Reading in terms of our increases. These are the different types of aid increases that the Chapter 70 program is adjusting and at play. And the minimum aid level set at $30 per pupil, which has been the amount for a number of years, is where North Reading has defaulted to because of the discrepancy in our target aid and our actual aid. So we're not qualifying for foundation aid increases, down payment aid increases, growth aid, which some other districts would be. So we're sort of in some ways immune to these Student Opportunity Act initiatives because of where we stand in relation to our target. So fiscal 24, $30 per pupil, we've been about that $68,000, $66,000 to $68,000 range based on our foundation enrollment. Again, foundation enrollment is the number of students that a district is financially responsible for. It's not your actual October 1 enrollment, with students being educated in the district. FY23, the minimum aid level was funded at $60 per pupil. So that amount in North Reading, that's why that was about twice as high. And you can see some of the other factors at play. So again, target to actual aid percentages in North Reading, you can see because this delta has existed by about 8 to 10%, 10% about since fiscal 12 and 13. Since that factor has existed and that we've been in that same type of time frame, 10, 11, 12 years, we've been a minimum aid increase community because of this delta between target aid and our actual aid. So as long as this exists in the formula, I believe North Reading will continue to fall to a minimum aid community and just get the $30 per pupil times the foundation enrollment or whatever that minimum aid is set at. Hopefully it gets increased from 30 to maybe 50, 55, or $60 per pupil, which has happened as the budget has moved to the House and the Senate. How does North Reading compare to some of these other communities in relation to their target aid and to actual aid? Many of our communities in this geographic area, North Reading, Wakefield, Reading, Wilmington, Stoneham, are all what's known as minimum aid communities. We're all in the last few years, since about fiscal 20, been at 17.5%. And based on some changes to the Chapter 70 formula and ed reform, it was set at no district would have to contribute any less than 17.5%. So 17.5% was the minimum level. But affluent communities, in eyes of the formula, are what's known as that minimum aid community, and that is what North Reading, along with these other communities, are set at 17.5%. Then you look at where we are in relation to that target aid of 17.5%. In North Reading is the dark blue. We are just about 10%. And this year, maybe a little bit less than that, 8% off our target. Wilmington's even a little bit greater, or has been greater, about 15% off their target. In communities like Stoneham and Wakefield, much closer, almost right at their target. And then a community like Reading, a little bit closer, 6 or 7% distance from their target. So again, North Reading, not because of this, variables in action, we're not due to see the large upticks or increases in Chapter 70 as because of this. So I hope that was helpful. We are just kicking off our budget process. I'll be posting the North Reading budget on the school website this week, so you can follow the North Reading FY24 budget by clicking on these links. You can also follow me on Twitter and at NRPS Finance. And I hope this was a helpful presentation to dispelling some of the myths or the uncertainties around the educational state formula known as the Chapter 70 program and how that is looking like it's going to impact North Reading in the foreseeable future. Great. Thank you very much for your time today.